Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez reporting in Washington, where we have breaking developments in the Israel-Hamas war as we learn 2 more hostages taken by Hamas into Gaza during that deadly October 7th attack have now been released. NBC News has confirmed the release of 2 Israeli hostages from Gaza. According to multiple sources, the International Red Cross says they transported the 2 elderly hostages out of Gaza this evening. And this is video broadcast by Israeli TV just moments ago of the hostages being loaded into an ambulance at the Rafah crossing. The military wing of Hamas says they released the pair for, quote, compelling humanitarian reasons. Reacting to the news, a spokesperson for the Israeli military said Hamas is using the hostages to buy time as Israel prepares for a ground incursion. The news comes after 2 American hostages were released by Hamas on Friday. More than 200 hostages are still believed to be held in Gaza, according to the Israeli military, and the White House said today a handful could be Americans.
We have no higher priority than the safety of Americans that are being held around the world, and we're going to continue around the clock to see if we can get them home with their families where they belong. It is literally an hour-by-hour effort here at the White House and at the State Department to find out where these folks are and to try to make the effort to get them out and get them back. A small group we still think are Americans, and then there are dozens and dozens from other countries, and obviously Israel as well. And there's just a lot of effort going on, a lot of conversations and discussions with partners in the region, and I think it's just best if we don't detail that.
And amid the high-stakes efforts to get hostages released, U.S. officials tell NBC News that the Biden administration is now advising Israel to delay a ground invasion of Gaza to allow more time for hostage negotiations, as well as for humanitarian aid to reach civilians. Over the weekend, the first trucks of humanitarian aid made their way across the Rafah border with Egypt. But aid groups say it is a mere drop in the ocean compared to what's needed. This afternoon, the White House said any decision on a ground offensive was up to the Israeli military.
It's our view that the Israeli Defense Forces, Steve, need to decide for themselves how they're going to conduct operations. We're not in the business of dictating terms to them, and we're certainly not going to be in the business here from the White House of previewing any future operations one way or the other. That would be inappropriate.
Meanwhile, Israel has intensified its aerial bombardment of the Gaza Strip. The IDF says it hit 320 military targets in Gaza in the last 24 hours. Some of the most intense strikes since the conflict began. This was the scene in Gaza City earlier today as people fled following a nearby airstrike. The UN says about 60% of Gaza's population has been displaced. And joining me now with the latest on the hostage release is NBC's Hala Gourani in Tel Aviv. And with me on set is Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrew Mitchell. And also with us, Ambassador Dennis Ross, former Special Assistant to President Obama and Middle East Coordinator under President Clinton. Thank you all so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now. And Hannah, what else do we know about this hostage release?
Well, we know that the 2 women, elderly women, 85-year-old Yoshev Lifchitz and the 79-year-old Nurit Yitzhak, have been released. They are now on the other side of the border inside of Egypt. We've seen images broadcast by Egyptian state media of Yoshev Lifchitz in a stretcher inside an ambulance. We understand she's been transferred to a second vehicle. This is obviously a big relief for the families of these 2 detained women who have spent now 2 weeks in Hamas captivity, but there are more than 200 others inside the Gaza Strip, including, we understand, the husband of Yosheved Lifchitz. The ICRC, the Red Cross, Red Crescent, has said that they took custody of the 2 women and handed them over to officials on the other side of the Rafah border crossing. And this is, of course, the border crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. I spoke to a source who was briefed on the talks and who confirmed to me a few hours ago that this was the result of negotiations that were led by Qatari and Egyptian officials. And Qatar here has played once again an important role because it does host the political office of Hamas and therefore has a direct line of communication with the group.
So, Hala, is the strategy here by Hamas to essentially release these hostages slowly to buy time?
Yes, it seems like that could be one of the strategies. And we also know that the president himself has been telling the Israeli leadership and the prime minister, look, if you can delay a ground incursion to give space, to give oxygen, to give time for some of these hostages to be released and for some humanitarian aid to make it into the Gaza Strip, that would be a good idea. That would be advisable. We know that a very small amount of humanitarian aid so far has made it inside the Gaza Strip. Only a few dozen trucks. Before the war, 300 to 400 vehicles would make the crossing every day, and here we're looking at just 15 or 20 every 2 or 3 days. So it's not enough. And what you're seeing here, by the way, are images of, we understand, Yofjid Lifchis. She's the 85-year-old who was released. We understand that she is frail, that she is in need of oxygen, that she is medically vulnerable. And the source I spoke to, who was briefed on these talks mediated by Egypt and Qatar, said that that was one of the reasons that Hamas chose them. But yes, of course, strategically, they're using these hostages as negotiating tools, as pawns, right, as leverage with the Israelis in terms of trying to perhaps delay a ground incursion.
And Hala, these pictures are pretty dramatic, but it's essentially what Hamas wants the world to see at this point, is it not?
Yes, I think what they're trying to do is to say, look, when if you would like to see more of this, then a ground incursion is not a good idea. I think if I were to put it any way, I would phrase it that way. And I think this is a way to put pressure on the Israeli leadership, and also perhaps to send a message to Israelis, to ordinary Israelis, that if you want to see more of your hostages released, perhaps a delay to the ground offensive, the military assault that has been promised, is a good idea. This is probably a message that is sent to the world, but also to the people inside of Israel.
Hala Garani in Tel Aviv. Hala, thank you. Stick with us. And I want to turn now to our Chief Foreign Affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, you know, we've been reporting today that the White House has been advising, at least for the last several days, not to go ahead with this ground invasion. But they've been very careful. I mean, to point out that they don't want it to seem as they're telling Israel what to do. What's the latest on your reporting, and how does this play into it? Yet another 2 hostages released. Where do we go from here? Is this going to keep happening?
It could keep happening, and one of the wishes on the U.S. side, the Israeli side, is that it does keep happening, more than 2 at a time. But the U.S. has been carefully saying and over repeating, we do not dictate anything to the Israelis. And it's always been on the one hand, and on the other hand, we are not dictating. They have the right, in fact, the obligation to defend themselves. That is the phrase that Secretary Blinken and the President have used. But, and the big but is, of course, we are in conversations with them. The President confirmed that. I think he was coming out of church in Rehoboth or in Wilmington this weekend that, you know, yes, I'm talking to the Israelis. He's been talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu and giving him this balancing of, yes, you have the right and the obligation, you have to defend yourself. We will continually emphasize that globally. But their feeling was, according to many officials and all of our reporting, that they should go slow on the ground invasion for a number of reasons, that it was against their interests because the world opinion was turning against them, and people were, the mass populations in Europe and the United States were not, and certainly in the Arab street, we're not thinking about the slaughter of Hamas, of the Israeli citizens, the invasions of their homes, the kidnapping, and all of the horror on October 7th, that they were seeing what's happening in Gaza, the leveling of block after block, the people who were under siege and didn't have food, water, fuel. And so the slowness of the delivery of the humanitarian aid was part of this. Blinken and President Biden urging Egypt, Hamas, and Israel, get the aid in and get a permanent corridor of aid in before you do a ground invasion.
And Andrea, before I get to the White House, I want to ask you about the significance of the Qatari government here. We got that release from the White House on Friday, where President Biden went out of his way to thank Qatar. We understand, as serving as an intermediary here with Hamas. How critical is the role of the Qatari government moving forward? And also, as we look ahead to the UN the Security Council meeting tomorrow.
No, absolutely critical, because that's why Secretary Blinken went to Qatar, went everywhere in the region, went to Egypt, but to talk to all of the Gulf partners, to Egypt. But Qatar hosts, as Hala was saying, hosts the senior political, if there's such a thing as political non-military leaders of Hamas. It's a terror group. And also credited today in their own statement, Hamas credited Qatar and Egypt. So now they're crediting El-Sisi, the president of Egypt. It's been the military, the intelligence agencies in all of these countries, but principally Qatar, and in this instance, Egypt, who have the most influence over Hamas.
Those relationships so critical to get these hostages out. I want to turn now to Ali Rafa at the White House. And Ali, John Kirby, Admiral Kirby, this afternoon speaking at that White House briefing room, saying, that there are that the administration is sending advisors to Israel. And talk to me a little bit more about that NBC News reporting that the U.S. is trying to walk that fine line, trying to advise the Israelis to delay this ground invasion. Where do we go over the next couple days?
Yeah, Gabe, these administration officials, at least publicly, are saying that, as you heard Andrea say, Israel has the right to defend itself, that the U.S. is not giving Israel its military orders, simply saying that the U.S. has officials on the ground in Israel offering perspective and advice, answering any questions, asking some hard questions, because we know that officials have told the Israelis, advised them not to make the same mistakes that, in the president's words, that the U.S. made after 9/11, not to act out of rage and frustration in this counteroffensive against Gaza, against Hamas in Gaza. But as our team has reported, multiple U.S. officials are telling us that the Biden administration privately is advising the Israelis to hold off on that ground offensive, to be able to allow these hostage recovery talks to continue, to allow the talks about humanitarian aid going into Gaza to continue. Of course, we just saw just a fraction of that aid just start to flow into Gaza over the weekend. And these officials say that this was a top goal that the president had in going to Israel last week, to talk to the Israelis, to talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu about these goals, to hold off on that offensive, because there were serious concerns, especially over the past few days, as Israel's military posture has really escalated, over whether that so-called diplomatic window of opportunity would continue. The diplomatic window of opportunity that we saw after those two Americans were released by Hamas on Friday. So I think what we have to look out for next is really, were there any conditions agreed upon for Hamas to be able to release these hostages? Could we potentially see more hostages released, and how long that could potentially take, Gabe?
And picking up on that point, I want to turn now to Ambassador Dennis Ross. Ambassador, does the release of these two hostages give you any confidence that we could see a de-escalation of violence going forward?
I can see a delay. I don't see a de-escalation. I can see a delay based on considerations of trying to get more hostages out. I can see a delay in terms of also setting up a much more rigorous and systematic set of corridors to provide humanitarian assistance in. It is in Israel's interest to demonstrate it is fighting Hamas. It is not trying to punish the Palestinian people. There needs to be a distinction here as a way of, I think, also creating a better climate of opinion for when Israel actually does move. And in the end, the outcome of this, from an Israeli standpoint, can't be that Hamas can still threaten Israel, that Hamas is in a position to still control Gaza, that an effort to try to produce what I call a demilitarization in return for reconstruction can't be blocked by Hamas. It has done that multiple times before, especially after 2014 when they had a conflict for 52 days, but they were still in control. They still had a military capability. Israel clearly wants to put Hamas in a position where it doesn't have that capability, can't veto such kinds of assistance. So I do think this process will continue. And I also think that the whole reason for holding hostages is actually to try to prevent the Israelis from coming in. So don't expect, in my mind, a mass release of hostages, because Hamas continues to look at the holding of hostages as an asset for themselves.
Yeah, and essentially leverage. Ambassador, I want to ask you on that point. If Hamas is releasing these hostages 2 at a time, for however long they do, and that's just speculation, but if they did 2 at a time, would that be acceptable to Israel weeks from now?
Well, let's put it this way. If it's 2 at a time, it will not work for a long period of time to dissuade the Israelis from coming in. I think that if suddenly we see a release of 50, that will create an incentive to say, okay, let's give this more time. But if it continues to be, we now see 4 out of 222. So the idea that they can meet it out that way and that will prevent the Israelis from coming in, I think that's an illusion.
And what do you make of what we've been reporting here at the White House is, advising Israel to delay this ground invasion? Do you think that the Biden administration so far has been handling this the right way? Is it they're being very careful not to push the Israeli too much in public? Do you think that this is an effective strategy going forward?
I think actually it is. I think they're striking what is the right balance, because they're making it clear these decisions are Israeli decisions. And from the beginning, the president not only has been supportive of the Israelis, but he's also said Israel shouldn't be expected to live with this kind of a threat next door. At the same time, he said, look, there are other considerations. Can we get the hostages out, or at least can we get a large number of hostages out? And by the way, delaying this for some period of time is not only useful from the standpoint of getting more hostages out, it also gives the Israelis more time to acquire intelligence on where hostages might be. Don't assume, by the way, when the Israelis make a decision to go in, suddenly they're going in all at once. You should think about the fact that there may be much smaller kinds of incursions, some related to going after hostages or setting the battle space more effectively, reducing the ability of Hamas to be able to resist, acquire more intelligence not only about the hostages, but also getting Hamas to reveal itself in terms of how it's defending certain areas. So there are multiple reasons why the Israelis, from their own standpoint, might decide that they're not going to rush in, and even when they do, it may not be a mass invasion.
Ambassador, thank you so much. And before we go, I want to turn now to Andrea Mitchell, since we're so fortunate to have you here. Andrea, big picture. Over the last couple of days, we've seen the relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu changed so much to how we were several months ago. Take a step back here. How is the relationship right now over the last couple of days? Are these two countries just so intertwined, more so than they have been for months?
Absolutely, you've got that right. And there was a lot of resentment in Jerusalem by the cabinet, by Netanyahu, that he did not get, an audience, a meeting here in Washington in the Oval Office, as other leaders have, 2 years into the administration, more than 2 years in, and that he had to settle for a meeting at the UN General Assembly in New York. But they really worked very hard during that meeting. They came together principally on the Saudi-Israeli U.S. negotiations, not on all the details, but on the goal of doing that. And they came out in a very unified way. Whatever they said in private, we have some idea, but it's much closer. But as you point out, we are completely integrated in terms of mutual defense, and as close as two allies could be, other than a NATO ally. And it's no question that sending the two carrier groups was to deter a Hezbollah attack against Israel, but also to be available if the Iran-backed Hezbollah did attack Israel. That would engage the U.S.
And you brought up Saudi Arabia. Where does that, is that normalization with Saudi Arabia? Is that dead? I know Lindsey Graham was saying it wasn't, but what's your latest reporting on that? Do you think that has any realistic possibility, at least in the near term?
Not in the near term, but I think they want to keep it alive. For it to pass here in this Congress, it has to be early in 2024. It can't be deep into the primary season. We know already the opposition from many MAGA Republicans from Donald Trump. Therefore, it has to be done in the next couple of months after the new year, early in the spring or winter. And it depends on the ground invasion and how much the civilian deaths in Gaza to come when there is a ground invasion, how targeted it is, whether those humanitarian corridors remain open. What does the world see? Because right now, even in the Security Council last week, France voted with Russia for a pause. Wow. And Macron was heading there, this week, heading to the region, to Gaza.
Andrea Mitchell, thanks so much for joining us here on set. We really appreciate your insight. And now I'm joined by Jonathan Conricus, spokesman for the Israeli Defense Force. And, sir, I want to get to you, especially with these new developments that we're hearing about just in the last hour or so. Will Israel still launch its ground invasion even as Hamas is releasing hostages?
Hi, thank you for having me. Hamas is doing what we anticipated they would do. Very cynical, psychological warfare, trying to buy time by using the slow drip release of some of the hostages. We have 222 confirmed hostages inside Gaza. All of them must be returned. And our ground forces are ready to commence significant military operations in Gaza and to bring the fight to Hamas on their home turf. Whenever we will get the directive from the war cabinet, that will commence.
And Jonathan, I asked one of my previous guests the same question, but if Hamas is releasing these hostages, say, 2 at a time, is that acceptable for Israel moving forward?
Listen, I can't go into what is acceptable and what isn't. It's unacceptable that they took civilians, women, children, babies, people with disabilities, Holocaust survivors, people that are sick and in need of medications. That is unacceptable. Every minute that these civilians are held, and also the militaries and the military men and women and the bodies that are being held, all of that is unacceptable, and all of these hostages must be returned promptly, and we hold Hamas accountable for each and every Israeli held.
So, Jonathan, is there any potential for a ceasefire here?
I am not aware of any such discussions. The only thing I am aware of is troops ready on the ground, Air Force striking Hamas targets from the air, and an elevated sense of understanding within the IDF that there is a tremendous task at hand that needs to be done so that never again in the future will we return to the scenes and the atrocities of October the 7th, where more than 1,000 Israelis were slaughtered in their homes and at the music festival.
Jonathan, these are the first Israeli hostages to be released by Hamas. Does that give you any hope that there could be additional Israelis freed soon?
The early takeaway from this is I think that Hamas are beginning to understand how their heinous crimes are reflecting on their image. If there's still people around the world who thought anything positive of this bunch of criminals and murderers and rapists, then Hamas understands that many people around the world who may be sympathetic to Gazans and Palestinians understand Hamas for what they are. They're ISIS-like terrorists, and the fact that they released dual citizens before was also criticized, and they're probably responding to that and trying to signal to Israel that they have other intentions. But we see through their psychological warfare, we understand what they're doing, and we're not going to have it. All of the hostages must be returned, and we are ready to launch our ground operations.
And Jonathan, to be clear, did the IDF have any role in negotiating this hostage release?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
We've been reporting here at NBC News that the Biden administration has been advising Israel to potentially delay this ground invasion, while U.S. officials publicly have been very careful to make it clear that they don't dictate what Israel does. What's your reaction to that? How much of a consideration is any advisement by U.S. officials regarding that ground invasion?
Yeah, that's a relevant topic. So what's happening is that there is very close coordination, both on the military and on the strategic international level between Israel and the U.S. We are looking at things from sometimes different perspectives, but also shared perspectives. We look at the local and we look at the regional, and we do it together. We share intelligence assessments, we share planning, and there is very close coordination between us and the US military, happens minute by minute, including face-to-face and on the ground. And I think that is important, because what we do want to prevent is a regional war, which would engulf not only Israel, but many of the countries around us, or some of the countries around us. We definitely want to avoid that. We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us, and we are looking to isolate one of the Iranian proxies that we have on our borders. For the time being, that is Hamas. And we want to focus on dealing with it. We are not seeking to escalate the situation here.
Jonathan, very briefly before I let you go, last week President Biden said that he was in discussions with Prime Minister Netanyahu about potential alternatives to any ground invasion of Gaza. What would those alternatives be?
I wouldn't be able to assess. I mean, what I know very certainly and clearly, this war ends with a totally dismantled Hamas. I am not aware of any other scenario how this will end. And that is what the IDF intends to execute. Once ordered by the cabinet, the IDF will implement that, so that, again, we will hear the sound of Israeli kids laughing and playing in their homes in the communities around the Gaza Strip.
Thank you, Jonathan Conricus. Thank you so much for your time, spokesman for the Israeli Defense Force. We really appreciate you here on Meet the Press Now. And up next, the threat of a broader regional conflict. We'll get to the latest from the Pentagon and from Lebanon, where the fighting is intensifying. And later, a leaderless House divided. Tonight, 9 House Republican candidates make their pitch in a closed-door meeting after rejecting Jim Jordan's bid for Speaker. We'll talk to a Republican member of Congress in the thick of the fight. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. And welcome back. Amid the ongoing Israel-Hamas war and today's release of 2 additional hostages, there are growing concerns about what role Iran could play in escalating the conflict into a broader regional war. In Lebanon, there have been ongoing clashes between Israel and Iranian-backed Hezbollah. Last week, the U.S. Navy shot down 3 missiles and several drones fired by Iranian-backed Houthi forces in Yemen. And today, the Pentagon confirmed another attempted drone attack against U.S. forces in Syria. Also today, the White House is out with this warning to Iran and its proxies in the region.
We know Iran continues to support Hamas and Hezbollah. And we know that Iran is closely monitoring these events and in some cases actively facilitating these attacks and spurring on others who may want to exploit the conflict for their own good or for that of Iran. We know Iran's goal is to maintain some level of deniability here, but we're not going to allow them to do that. We also are not going to allow any threat to our interest in the region to go unchallenged.
And joining me now is Matt Bradley, live for us in Lebanon, and Courtney Cubie is at the Pentagon. And Matt, I want to start with you. The U.S. State Department is telling Americans to leave Lebanon. So what's the latest on the clashes in the north?
Yeah, well, we haven't seen our toughest day yet. I mean, there has been worse clashes so far in the past 2 weeks. But today we heard from Hezbollah at least one of their fighters had been killed and at least 2 Israelis were injured on the other side. But there has been an increase in the tempo and the ferocity of the fighting back and forth. So, yes, we've been seeing this increasing over the past couple of days. Today doesn't represent a pause, but it's part of a week-long escalation. And we think it could escalate even more. The question is, how far will it escalate before this whole thing breaks out into a full-on cross-border war?
And Matt, could a delayed ground invasion by Israel prevent that wider war? So would a ground invasion essentially be a tipping point for Hezbollah?
The ground invasion, as we've heard from various people within or connected to Hezbollah, is definitely the tipping point. That's what everybody is waiting here for. Now, your question, whether delaying it will somehow cool tempers. And I think that's what you mean. I really don't know, because the fact is that Israel is on vengeance mode right now. The Gaza Strip is also on vengeance mode, and the rest of the entire region is feeling steeped in emotion. Some of them with what they consider to be the success of this Operation Al-Aqsa flood. Others with anger at what's been happening to the people in the Gaza Strip. I just don't know if waiting or delaying is necessarily going to cool down tempers. It might just be delaying the inevitable. Gabe?
And I want to turn now to Courtney Kube at the Pentagon. And Courtney, what do we know about the latest attack against U.S. and coalition forces in Syria? We have new reporting on that, right?
Yeah, there were two what the military calls one-way attack drones that attempted to attack a U.S. military garrison in southern Syria. It's called a Tanf. It's right down by the border with Jordan. Both of them were knocked out of the sky, shot down by some of the base defenses. But this is follows in a long line of these kinds of attacks that we've seen happen in Iraq, in Syria, and even out in the Red Sea since last Wednesday. Attacks on Anbar in western Iraq, another one on Tanf up in Erbil, at Baghdad. And then the one that's really striking to me, Gabe, is the USS Carney, a USS warship that was in the northern Red Sea, had to shoot down a number of drones that the U.S. military says were fired by the Houthis in Yemen and potentially heading towards Israel. That is at least 4 land attack cruise missiles and more than a dozen drones that were shot down. So this has been a real uptick in this kind of activity. We haven't really seen this level of activity by these Iranian-backed proxy groups in Iraq and in Syria since earlier this year. This uptick, according to U.S. officials, they are not drawing a direct line. What we heard from John Kirby earlier about Iran maybe actively directing some of these or actively participating in some of these attacks, that's the most stark language that we've heard to date. Others have pointed to the historical ties between Iran and some of these proxy groups, with the Iranians training them, arming them, and funding many of these groups, Gabe.
And you mentioned, you were listing off all those attacks, and you hadn't seen that type of activity since earlier this year. But historically, how unusual is this type of activity?
Candidly, it really depends on the time. There are times of the year where it really ticks up. Several years ago, we would see these sorts of attacks 1 or 2 in a week. What changed was there was an attack in March in Syria, a deadly attack that the U.S. military responded to, and that really seemed to ratchet down the tensions and end these sorts of attacks on these military bases by rockets, by drones, by indirect fire. We really haven't seen anything like that since March of this year. So, I mean, again, the big question here is why did these Iranian-backed proxy groups, why did they start these again now? Everyone that we talk to says, of course, there must be some sort of a tie to what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Gaza, that Iran frequently, historically tries to exploit these sorts of unstable situations, chaos in the region, to create more chaos. That being said, officials we've spoken to are still saying that they don't have a direct link back to Iran for giving something like a green light to these sorts of attacks. It's the question that we've been asking, though, here, Gabe, and I know all around town.
And Courtney, before I let you go, how concerned is the Pentagon about potential miscalculation by any of the players in the region, and what's being done to mitigate that possibility?
So, I mean, that's really the big concern here. So look at some of these attacks that we've had. One of the drones at a Tanf last week that was not shot down, it did target the base and attacked it successfully. Several U.S. personnel were injured. They were minor lacerations. But think about if that had ended a little differently and ended in a more severe injury or even the deaths of U.S. personnel. We could have seen a much more we would have likely seen some sort of a U.S. military response to that. So the concern here is nobody really knows what these proxy groups are trying to do. Are they just trying to take attention away from Israel and Gaza? Are they just trying to sow chaos? We don't really know the answer to that. But if one of these attacks is successful, it could have a very different outcome than what we've seen so far, Gabe.
A close call with potentially large implications. Courtney Kube at the Pentagon, Matt Bradley in Lebanon. Thank you both so much. And up next, the speaker fight and the 9 new candidates hoping 4th time's the charm. We'll speak with a key player in the last floor vote after the break. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. It's been 20 days of paralysis in Congress without an elected House Speaker. and Republicans are back to square one, looking for a new nominee. And this time, it's a crowded field, with 9 House Republicans throwing their hats into the ring ahead of a closed-door candidate forum in just a few hours. A Republican conference is planning to vote tomorrow morning until one candidate gets a majority. Then, presumably, they'll bring that candidate to the House floor to try for a 4th time to elect a speaker. And joining me now is Arkansas Republican Congressman Steve Womack. And Congressman, thanks so much for coming back to meet the press now. Good to have you.
Dave, always good to be with you.
Awesome. Well, Congressman, there are 9 declared candidates to be the next Republican speaker nominee. Who are you backing this time around?
Well, I'm going to back the person that can get 217 GOP votes in conference, because we need this entire process to come to a quick and effective end as soon as possible. And look, I'm going to go like the rest of my colleagues tonight at 6:30 and listen to the 9. You know, we have 9 that have announced. We have easily another 9 or maybe 90 that look in the mirror and see the next Speaker of the House. So I would just tell you that we got to coalesce around somebody. We're going to listen to the messages. We're going to hear what they have to say. They will make their best case. We will vote, and then little by little we will come up with a nominee, and then we'll go to the floor as we have on 2 other occasions and see where this thing shakes out. I'm not real sure that any of them can get 217, but we will let it play out and see. And
Congressman, what makes you think this time will be different?
Well, a couple of things. One, first, I'm not in agreement that this time is different, but there's a couple of external factors bearing down on us. One, as you say, we're in a state of paralysis right now. We're not doing anything. The House chamber is effectively empty. Nothing is happening that's going to benefit the American people right now, and I think there's a lot of pressure from that standpoint. Then you've got what's going on, as you've adequately reported, overseas, and those are issues that have, you know, a relationship to the business that we should be conducting right now. And in order to be able to get past where we are right now and be able to deal with those issues, I mean, and plus we're on the clock. November 17th, we're going to lapse in appropriations. So very soon we're going to be into November, and if this thing isn't over, the pressure will continue to mount. But that's not the reason to just say we're going to elect a speaker. It really needs to be the right person, too, with all the right ideas.
Well, Congressman, you backed McCarthy, then Scalise. Why not Emmer?
Well, I'm not saying I'm not going to support Tom Emmer. I haven't thrown my support behind anybody because I think it's premature to do so. To be fair to the other 8...
Congressman, we're 20 days into this.
I realize that, but to be fair to the other 8, they haven't had the chance, other than Austin Scott, to make their case, and Austin only had 30 minutes to prepare. So I think it's fair to all of them, given where we are, to hear what they have to say, and then do the check and balance on whether their ideas and their vision and their commitment and their skill sets are capable of being able to take this Congress where this Congress needs to go.
And Congressman, you mentioned it, but Emmer and Georgia's Austin Scott are the only members running who joined you in certifying the 2020 election. Does that matter to you?
Well, you know, whether it matters to me or not is not important. I think the bigger question is that if we get into a situation where one of them is a nominee and is very close to the finish line, but just a little bit short, I think it means a lot to the other side that could participate in the final outcome, because, look, the pressure is mounting on Democrats, too, to come to agreement on something that could end this stalemate. So whether that would be taking a pass on the vote, lowering the threshold for winning the speakership, I don't know what that would look like. It could even involve members on the other side calling out a Republican name. But as the pressure mounts and as the world around us burns, I think there will be an opportunity for maybe some of those issues to surface in this discussion.
And as the world around us burns, there is a letter circulating among your conference for members to pledge to support the conference's nominee. Have you signed on to that letter? What do you think of it?
I have not. Look, I don't sign on to letters that pledge that I'm going to do something a certain way. I'm not going to cede my voting card. This voting card belongs to me and the 750,000 people in the 3rd District of Arkansas. And they have asked me to come up. They've elected me to come up here and make value-based decisions that's in the best interest of what they represent and in the best interest of the country. And that's how I approach each and every vote that I take in Congress.
And Congressman, are there any serious conversations right now about empowering Patrick McHenry? Do you think there are 217 votes to do that? So there are those conversations. Do you think there are enough votes?
Well, it's a card that we still could play. To be determined. I think we need to go through this next series. We've got 9 really, really good people, very committed people, very strong conservative credentials that are going to go make their presentation and try to win over the majority of our votes, and they need to have that opportunity. If, in fact, we don't do that, I think there will be a ramped-up effort to empower Patrick McHenry so that the House floor can open for business once again, and then we can maybe put this issue of a permanent speaker behind us for the time being.
And Congressman, humor me. If it took Democratic votes to empower McHenry as Speaker pro tem, would you do that?
You know, to be determined. I mean, it's a House vote. The House gets to vote. And I think Patrick is a very capable and qualified person. I'm not real sure Patrick wants us to be able to empower him right now. The message I'm getting from Patrick is we need to get this issue behind us and move on to the next thing. Patrick is a committee chair, financial services, and I know he'd like to get back to that work. So we'll just see. Let this thing play out. I know the people are frustrated. I'm frustrated. But at the end of the day, this is how this process unfolds, and we need to let it work. And then if it can't, then maybe some of these other last resort measures will be in play. And
Congressman, some folks are more than frustrated. I want to play what your colleague Michael McCall, said over the weekend. Take a listen.
The world's on fire, and this is so dangerous what we're doing. And most importantly, it's embarrassing because it empowers and emboldens our adversaries like Chairman Xi, who says, you know, democracy doesn't work.
Congressman, do you agree? Is the conduct of your conference an embarrassment to democracy?
I agree with Mike McCall that the world is burning around us, and American leadership is necessary, and you can't have the full complement of American leadership if the House of Representatives is not functioning. Whether it's an embarrassment or not, I mean, that's in the eyes of the beholder. I will just tell you, it's unfortunate. The world is watching. Our adversaries are paying attention, and it does not, cast a good light on the democratic institutions that we all have sworn to defend. So, again, let's hope and pray that this week is it, and we can move on to the next stage.
And Congressman, Ken Buck told us last week that he has no regrets about ousting Kevin McCarthy and spurring this fight. In your opinion, should Ken Buck have regrets?
Look, I try not to, question or criticize or theorize as to why people vote a certain way. Shouldn't have happened. 8 members of our conference should not have joined 208 Democrats to throw out the duly elected Speaker of the House. Kevin McCarthy was doing the very best job he could under the circumstances. And I think all that happened to Kevin McCarthy maybe foretells what could be in the future for whoever wins this speakership the next time around. So we have to learn from it. And sometimes that learning process takes a little while, and you got to get burned a couple of times. But at the end of the day, I think we'll get this behind us soon.
Congressman Steve Womack, thanks so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now. And joining me now here on set is Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today, Mo Alethi, Democratic strategist and director of Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service, and Brendan Buck, former advisor to Republican speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan, as well as an NBC News political analyst. Thank you so much for joining me. And Susan, I want to start with you. You know, they say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. How insane is the Republican conference right now?
Well, did that sound like a process that was coming to a conclusion? No. When this congressman, who is a pretty respected voice in the House, isn't backing anybody, won't say if he would support a candidate if he was dependent on Democratic votes to get where he needed to go, if you needed Democratic votes, for instance, to empower Patrick McHenry to act like a speaker. This is a process that it sounds like we may not even, this group of 9, the eventual speaker, assuming there is an eventual speaker, may not even be among these 9. I think we are nowhere in this process.
And Brendan, I want to turn to you. You know this conference better than most. What do you make of this? 9 men now going for speaker. Will the fourth time be the charm?
Yeah, I don't know if we can have any confidence that it is. There you have Steve Womack basically saying, I'm also holding back. I may be willing to block the next person that comes up. If everybody is waiting for their perfect candidate, we will never get there. The one thing that I did find interesting, he keeps holding out Patrick McHenry, the Speaker pro tem, as an option. One thing that may be working to all of our advantage for this to end is the idea that the alternative might be Patrick McHenry. It may ultimately become clear to these members that if we don't coalesce around somebody, it's going to end up being a Speaker pro tem, which they don't like. They want someone permanent. They want someone that's the Republican Speaker of the House. And maybe that will convince people it's just not worth having this fight anymore. One thing I do know about this conference, they don't learn lessons very easily. They don't really understand that when we've hit rock bottom. So I imagine they're probably going to keep digging for a little while. So who knows?
And Mo, I want to turn to you. Just 2 of these Republican candidates voted to certify the 2020 election. Are any of these potential partners for Democrats going forward, or no?
I mean, look, it depends on what the House Republican Conference does, right? They're going to put forward a candidate or they're not. If they don't, I think there are enough Democrats out there who are willing to work with enough Republicans to actually come up with this empowering McHenry option. But are any Democrats going to cross over and actually vote for any of these individuals to be Speaker? No, of course they won't. Look, they did not vote to save Speaker McCarthy's job, in part because they lost trust in him for breaking several promises as they see it. None of these guys are going to be seen as, especially the 7 who voted against certification, none of them are going to be seen as more trustworthy Speaker candidates.
And Brendan, your old boss, John Boehner, said that he agreed with Newt Gingrich that it's time to empower McHenry. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. And I think there's a couple ways they could do it. You could vote to do it, or McHenry could just start trying to bring up bills and allow the Congress to challenge whether he has the authority.
And you brought that up in your op-ed last week, right?
The rules of the House are effectively whatever a majority says they are.
But that's essentially daring them to stop him.
Exactly right. And they could bring up something that would be hard to vote against, like something has to do with Israel, a resolution condemning Hamas. That would be really hard for somebody to object and say they don't want to come up. And once you've done that, you've sort of broken the seal. It might be able. Now, that is not a durable long-term solution.
And you know who's against that idea? Patrick McHenry is against that idea. And if you expect Democrats to rescue Republicans by either voting present or empowering Patrick McHenry, they're going to expect something in return for it. They're going to expect a guarantee there won't be a government shutdown, passage of Ukraine aid, and that's what is a poison pill for so many of the House Republicans.
That's why they don't want that coalition government. For the same reason that Kevin McCarthy didn't try to negotiate with Democrats to save his own job, Patrick McHenry knows that it would be poisonous for him in the Republican conference to deal and give something away. That's why he said in that meeting, I will only do this if you all vote for me to do it. That's the only way I'm doing it, because he understands how unpopular it will be. Now, things may look a little different if we're still 2 weeks from now and we don't have a speaker. Things may be a little more interesting.
Susan, last week there was all this talk about the urgency of this, that with the Israel-Hamas war, with the Biden administration putting forth that $105 billion supplemental package, it was announced, days are blurring together. I think it was Thursday or Friday. But now, this still hasn't gone anywhere. Is there any urgency left? And what does this chaos on the House mean for that supplemental package? That's a lot of money for Israel, Ukraine, a lot of other priorities that the administration says, border security. Is there any urgency left?
Well, that bill cannot go forward unless the House has a speaker or an empowered speaker pro tem. I think there is urgency around Ukraine aid, Israel aid, and also the November 17th budget deadline. November 17th is not that far away, and we're going to have a partial government shutdown if the House doesn't get its act together.
Mo, I want to turn to you. Last week, President Biden tried, speaking about the supplemental request, the president in his Oval Office address tried to link, the wars in Israel and in Ukraine. How effective was that messaging? Do you think that he effectively made that case to the American people?
I think he did a very solid job doing so. I think, look, people are seeing these images come out of Israel every single day, and I think we've seen even Democrats who were a little bit more split in polling in terms of their sort of unmitigated support for Israel are feeling a lot more supportive of Israel right now. Connecting that to Ukraine, he's got a very strong narrative to tell. The problem is not with the message he's delivering, but it's everything we've been talking about, what we're seeing coming out of the House. I think we are in a very dangerous place right now. I think the longer this mess, and it's all connected, the longer this mess goes on in the House, the stronger the president looks on these issues. But that doesn't mean we're going to actually get there anytime soon, and that's a very dangerous thing for the country.
And really quickly, Susan, I don't have a whole lot of time to get into 2024, but how do you think this mess in the House will affect 2024 going forward? There's already a lot of bickering between Governor Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley over the Israel-Hamas war, but in terms of the situation in the House with no House Speaker, how do you see this playing out over the next coming months before the caucuses?
You know, I think it may help President Biden look like the grown-up in the room, but I don't think it's got a big effect on it, and I think it continues to look pretty likely that Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee.
Okay. And Mo?
I don't think it's going to impact the presidential, except that it's going to allow the president to continue to drive the narrative that with Donald Trump as the nominee and these guys in charge of the House, do we really want to return to this sort of chaos, which was what he ran against in 2020 to great effect. I think Hakeem Jeffries is looking pretty good, though, to be the next actual permanent speaker after the midterms.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. Susan, Mo, and Brendan, thanks so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now. And still ahead, navigating humanitarian aid during a hostage crisis. We'll talk about the efforts to help those in the middle of the Israel-Hamas war. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. As we've been reporting, Hamas released 2 Israeli hostages today, allowing them out of Gaza. Meanwhile, some humanitarian aid is now moving into Gaza. The Palestinian Red Cross says it received a 3rd shipment of humanitarian aid today. 20 trucks with food and medicine crossed into Gaza from Egypt through the Rafah crossing. State Department spokesman Matt Miller was asked today about U.S. efforts to secure aid to Gaza.
What we will continue to do with respect to this question is focus on getting humanitarian assistance in to Gaza. We've seen deliveries go in for the past 3 days, and our special envoy on the ground, David Satterfield, is working intensively to establish ongoing mechanisms for the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and we're working to establish places where civilians can be safe from harm inside Gaza.
And NBC's Megan Fitzgerald has more from Cairo.
Since Saturday, we have seen 55 trucks make their way from Egypt through the Rafah border crossing and into Gaza. These trucks loaded with life-saving supplies, humanitarian aid, everything from water and food to medical supplies that the more than 2.2 million people in Gaza desperately need. But over the weekend, at a summit hosted by Egyptian President Sisi with leaders from all across the world, they spoke with one voice in saying it's not enough. There needs to be more aid given to Gaza, and it needs to happen faster. And, you know, UNICEF, for example, said that of the shipment that we saw go into Gaza on Saturday, there was enough water for 20,000 people that would last them for 1 day. And again, there's more than 2 million people in Gaza with this dire need. We heard yesterday from Ambassador Satterfield. He's the special envoy for Middle East humanitarian issues, and he said essentially that this is a race against time to try and get this aid to the people that desperately need it in Gaza before that ground operation kicks off from the Israelis. He says starting today, Monday, that we can see a ramp up in aid that comes from Egypt making its way to Gaza. So that most certainly is something that we'll be watching. Back to you.
Megan Fitzgerald reporting for us in Cairo. Megan, thank you. And thank you for being with us this hour. I'm Gabe Gutierrez. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson. Right.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.